Okay, calm down. You got rivers, man. You got rivers, man. Okay, calm down.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Katie Halper Show. Such a great time with you is coming down the pike. How do you like that opening? Yeah, we're going to have a great time tonight because we have great guests, as always, and we have so much to talk about. And before I bring on the first guest, who we're so lucky to have joining us because she's usually in a different time zone, which makes it hard for her to come on live at night, our time. Before I bring her on, just want to remind people to please hit the like button, share, and subscribe. And to do that, you hit subscribe and then the bell. That way you never miss any of our broadcasts. Also, if you can become Patreon supporters, please do that at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. And you get great extra content, bonus content, extended interviews, bonus interviews. We have a full interview with Brace Belden, which is really fascinating. He talks about the connections between Epstein and Israel. He talks about getting accused of having a micro penis by a Zionist who it turns out is involved in some revenge porn stuff, which is like guys in glass houses. And we also have a David Cross interview that we're releasing soon. So all of those things are available to our Patreon supporters. And that's at the $5 a month level. And if you cannot afford the $5 a month level, you can still join at the $1 a month level. That's just $12 a year. And you help make this show happen. We literally could not do this show without you. And lots of other shows say that, but they could. We really couldn't. And like when NPR says that, they could because they got government funding. Not that they have to like say that on Twitter or anything, because you don't have to say that unless you are state media for an adversarial government. Anyway, so I'm going to bring on the first guest. During the second half, we're going to be talking to Michael Tracey about Trump's major crush on Israel, about MAGA hypocrisy, and about Ukraine. But first, we're bringing on, usually based in Beirut, but right now on the East Coast, Rania Khalek, the great journalist and breakthrough news host. Welcome, Rania.
Katie,
Hi.
how are you?
Good,
to
you?
be on with you. I'm good.
Welcome. It's been too long. Oh, and we should announce that we're doing a live show. Rania, Abby, Martin, and I are going to be doing another live taping in September.
Yes, I'm
I believe
so excited.
September 19th, a Thursday. Yeah.
And also for those who missed the last one, it was back in January. You can watch that,
Yes.
right?
Yep, it's still online. Yeah, it was a great time.
It was awesome. So if you missed that one, you can go to this one.
Yeah. So you're very lucky.
Mark your calendars, friends.
Yeah, September 19th. If that's a Thursday, then that's correct. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah. So, Rania, we're going to talk about your SmackDown, by which I mean you smacked down. You were not SmackDown. You're SmackDown with Piers Morgan. But first, let's talk about some important news that's happening. As people probably know, and if you don't know, no shame, but the ICC, the International Criminal Court, announced on Monday that it's seeking arrest warrants for alleged war crimes committed by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, as well as 3 leaders of Hamas. And prosecutor Karim A.A. Khan said, quote, "We submit that the crimes against humanity charged were committed as a part of a widespread and systematic attack against the Palestinian civilian population pursuant to state policy. These crimes, in our assessment, continue to this day." So, Rania, let's take a look at how some people reacted to the news that the ICC was pursuing these arrest warrants. And we're going to start off with Joe Biden.
Let me be clear. We reject the ICC's application for arrest warrants against Israeli leaders.
Who claps at that?
Whatever these warrants may imply, there's no equivalence between Israel and Hamas.
Yeah, because Israel, the state of Israel, has killed many more people than Hamas has. I mean, that's one thing I'll agree with him on, that there's no equivalence.
No, there is no equivalence. Just not the way he's saying it.
Right.
Israel wants to do all it can to ensure civilian protection. But
wait, so he just said it's clear that Israel wants to do all it can to ensure civilian protection, even though a State Department report just said that they don't do that. I mean, it said it in the most like indirect, wishy-washy way. But
you have to be like delusional. You have to be delusional to think that Israel is Like it's like if you have like a boyfriend or a husband who's like beating you,
Yeah.
and they're like, "I love you."
And you believe it, right?
I love you. And you're like, "Oh, he loves me." No, but like
Yeah.
another party, like a third party is like, "No, he loves her. He's
Right.
doing everything he can to protect her."
But
And
Biden
it's
would
just like,
be
what?
like
Yeah.
the abusive boyfriend enabling the guy enabling the abusive boyfriend.
Yeah, Biden would be like shooting him up with steroids, and he'd be like, "No,
Right.
big muscles so he can so he can protect her."
Right. Well, he actually
Right.
smacks her around.
Beats
Yeah.
the shit. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I like that.
Let me be clear. Contrary to allegations against Israel made by the International Court of Justice, what's happening is not genocide. We reject that. We will always stand with Israel and the threats against its security.
Okay, so that's Biden. Let's take a look at another wise man, Lindsey Graham. He's going to be reacting to the ICC requesting arrest warrants. You're going to see he's not very happy about it, but he does applaud Anthony Blinken, Biden, and Chuck Schumer. So let's take a look at what Senator Lindsey Graham has to say.
So we, hopefully, together will find a way to register our displeasure with the ICC, because if they'll do this to Israel, we're next. This group tried to come after our soldiers. Yeah, you can clap all you want to. They tried to come after our soldiers in Afghanistan, but reason prevailed. So at the end of the day here, what I hope to happen is that we level sanctions against the ICC for this outrage to not only help our friends in Israel, but protect ourselves over time. Mr. Secretary, you're...
So that's, again, it's kind of like one of those moments where you're like, yeah, that would be great if they did.
Yeah. No, I hope they go after you next. I mean, look, I think Lindsey Graham has a point when he says that. If you're like a mass murderer and you're like, oh crap, like my best friend mass murderer is like maybe gonna have to face some consequences, like you should be concerned too, because then it might come on you. But also, like, I think there's something really interesting as well about the fact that, I mean, aside from Lindsey Graham being like a cartoon character who likes to make love to bombs,
and talk about Taiwan.
Well, it was reported. It was reported that Joe Biden has said he will support Republican attempts to do exactly what Lindsey Graham just said, which is to sanction the ICC and the officials that are involved in this prosecution. And so it's like our entire government on like a bipartisan level has been totally taken over by neocons.
Yeah.
Like I mean, what's the difference? Honestly, like, yeah, Lindsey Graham's a bit crazier. He goes on TV and says, I mean,
he's a bit more belligerent.
We should nuke Gaza. And I think he means that. But like, if they're all just going to do the same thing anyway, it's like Lindsey Graham's basically in charge.
Right.
It's scary.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And yesterday was excellent. The president's statement was excellent. Senator Schumer's statement on the floor was excellent about the outrage here. They have destroyed the notion of complementarity. They have misled people in the United States Senate about their intention, and they shall and will pay a price. Ms. Secretary, I appreciate what you've said. It is now time for us to act. Thank you.
Yeah.
I love Democrats. They're doing exactly what I want. Also, Lindsey Graham is like a sociopath and really should be taken out of the general population. Yeah, like I genuinely
I'm not a carceral person, but I think in his case, you probably have to lock him up.
There's some people who are just so dangerous.
That's true. Yeah.
Or like
beyond
power and like put him on a farm somewhere. I don't know. Like,
I could imagine him like in overalls with a straw hat and like
living his best life.
Yeah. Living his best life. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we have one more person we want to hear from, and that is none other than, not that you can tell the difference, honestly, between Lindsey Graham, Biden, and the next person, but that is Benjamin Netanyahu.
Creating a false symmetry between the democratically elected leaders of Israel and the terrorist chieftains. That's like saying after 9/11, well, I'm issuing arrest warrants for George Bush, but also for bin Laden, or after.
Yeah, why not?
I mean, I think that we should issue arrest warrants for George Bush. Also, with 9/11, I don't know if you guys saw that recent Atlantic piece.
Oh yeah,
about that Saudi involvement, but that's a story for another day. All that's to say, he's also just trying to like subliminally, not so subliminally, compare Hamas to Al-Qaeda, which not to suggest what the U.S. did in response to 9/11 is okay. It's not. It's horrific, and they like went on a murder spree around the world. but
didn't make the world safer. Didn't make
No.
America safer. Yeah.
no.
Right.
But they definitely, like, a lot of people got richer.
Yes,
And a
that's
lot of
true,
people
yeah.
died.
Yeah.
But no, like Hamas and Al-Qaeda are not the same thing. Palestinians are not the same thing. And he always, every chance Netanyahu gets, and he does it quite effectively, I think. Every opportunity he gets, he tries to make this equation between Palestinians fighting for their survival and Al-Qaeda, which was like a outcome of CIA sponsoring jihadists in Afghanistan.
Right. Yeah.
Not the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And they even say out loud all the time that Hamas is ISIS.
Yeah. That's like
I
their
mean-
big talking about. I mean, right after October 7th, though, that didn't stick as well. So they haven't said it as much. But
Right.
look, I think that Netanyahu, George Bush, basically like every American president that's still alive, and the entire Israeli government like need to be put on trial and then jailed to protect to protect humanity, honestly.
Well, isn't it funny when people say stuff like, well, if that was genocide, or if you're saying that Israel shouldn't have responded to October 7th, well, should the United States not have responded the way they did to September 11th? And you're like, yeah,
Yeah, they
of course
have
not.
responded. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
they shouldn't have invaded and bombed and destroyed Afghanistan,
Right.
invaded and bombed and destroyed Iraq and like Libya and basically the entire Middle East. Like, yeah, I don't think the U.S. should have started a torture facility in Guantanamo
Hot
Bay,
take.
a bunch of torture black sites. I totally don't think the U.S. should have responded that way.
Right.
It's just such a stupid talking point. But it's said by people who believe in that stuff. So like it
Right.
makes sense. But I think
Right.
the more interesting thing about the whole ICC case is I really recommend people go read Ali Abunima's take on it. He's like the guiding light when it comes to a lot of this stuff. He points out, well, he wrote two pieces. One is
An
one is
electronic
about
intifada.
yeah, for the electronic intifada, but he his piece is ICC warrants both historic and cynical. And I think it's important to understand that, to recognize that like it is historic that there might be arrest warrants for Israeli officials and like what that means, and that's important. But also it's insane that it's like Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, and then four leaders in Hamas. They want to issue an arrest warrant for 4 people in charge of an organization that we still don't know how many people they killed on October 7th, by the way, because we're not sure how many people the Israelis actually killed by bombing their own people to prevent them from becoming hostages.
Mass
and how many
Hannibal,
Hamas
as
killed.
the
Yeah,
Israeli
and-
media put it.
And all of like the ridiculous blood libels they've launched against Palestinians, like especially like Joe Biden, where what did he say at Morehouse College?
Oh my
He was
God,
like-
about the woman burned.
yeah, they
Right,
tied up a
yeah.
mother and forced her to watch her children be burned alive. And Joe Biden apparently saw photos of this
Yeah.
because there was somebody there to photograph
Right.
the timeline of that. Okay, there's no
Yeah.
proof that happened. But anyway, I mean, it's just, to me, like it's so ridiculous. Like even if I'm generous and I say Hamas killed 1,200 people, which I don't believe they did, and we're going to pretend that they were all civilians, which they all weren't civilians, but I'll be generous and give you that. How does that compare to killing probably like what's way more than 40,000 people? We just don't know the true death toll yet.
Yeah.
Like, how
No.
is that the same? Unless you think Palestinians just like don't count as much
Yeah.
as Israelis.
Right. Which, well, obviously they don't think that. So, yeah. There's something else interesting I thought we could talk about, Rania, and I know that you are interested in this. There was an interesting conversation that happened, I believe, on Breaking Points, and we have someone, an Arab American leader, who met with Anthony Blinken, and here's what Anthony Blinken said to this Arab American leader.
And so when the topic of statehood got brought up, we had asked for both a free and independent Palestine, a statehood, and a seat at the UN Security Council table. And the response was disappointing because it made the comparison to, well, first and foremost, that a vote for a Palestinian statehood from the US would lead to the defunding of the UN from the US being its primary funder. But then the example brought up was that it would be within the right of the UN to then cut programs like the World Food Program. And so the fact that the comparison was made that the world would have to go hungry just like the Gazans are and the fact that it's U.S. policy to starve the world. If Palestinians have a free state, regardless of if that's the law or not, is indicative of something severely wrong.
Yeah, Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, so Anthony Blinken said, we have to oppose Palestinian statehood or else the World Food Program budget will be cut and people will starve around the world. Like, that's the Secretary of State's assessment that he's making to you guys in this meeting?
The example was given that if the UN had to cut its funding, it would have to cut programs like the World Food Program. And that was the example shared, followed by the explanation that then the world would have to starve as the Gazans are. And so that is not the comparison you make to make an argument for why Palestinians should not have a free state.
It's insane.
Wow. Yeah. And that's Bilal Hamoud is the name of that Arab American leader. Yeah.
I mean, I think that what that demonstrates is that, look, the U.S. is clearly willing to kill way more than 40,000 Palestinians to protect their settler colony in the Middle East. And it's quite frightening. I mean, the destructive capacity of the U.S. is huge, not just with bombs, but obviously like a lot of the programs that they've forced a lot of the global south to be reliant on to not starve, like the World Food Program, rely a lot on U.S. funding. So if the U.S. were to defund those sorts of things, you would see people die very quickly. So I think it just shows you how serious they are about protecting Israel and really just protecting U.S. empire. At the end of the day, that's all that means. Protecting Israel means protecting the U.S. Israel's extension of the U.S. I actually am curious, Katie, your thoughts. Like, we didn't really talk about this before we're going to go on, but I know you probably saw that woman who resigned from the Biden administration who was like, I think that Biden is making Jews the face of American militarism. And I think that's really dangerous. And I thought that the way she phrased that was really smart and true.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm actually curious, I know it's your show, but I'm curious what you think about that, because like, that's actually what's happening. Like, they're literally just like throwing up Jews and being like, we have to basically do genocide and maybe starve the world. And we have to do it for the Jews.
For the sake of the Jews. Yeah, I mean, I've said this a few times that the thing that makes me want to speak out and focus on this issue on my show and in my life are two things. One is I would do it no matter what, because I think Palestinians, are oppressed, vilified.
Sounds kind of anti-Semitic to me, but okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But they are denied basic human rights, etc. I'm not saying anything revolutionary here or original, but also as a Jew, two things. As a Jew, so I guess three things. It's a moral, ethical emergency. Then as a Jew, I'm motivated by two things. One is it's important to show, for the sake of Palestinians, I think, that Jews are in solidarity with Palestinians, because every time a Jew does that, it makes it harder and harder to say that supporting Palestinian rights is anti-Semitic. I mean, some people just say it's self-loathing, whatever, fine. But also for more like selfish reasons, relating back to your question, it is important to show the world out of self-interest that not all Jews are okay with this. I mean, Jews are speaking up against this because the world, like, Israel tries to conflate being Jewish with being Zionist. And I've said this many times, the irony there is that that's an old anti-Semitic trope. It's like the dual loyalty trope, right? Which all these people who defend Israel find hiding behind any statement. They said that about Ilhan Omar. But Israel, the ADL, and AIPAC are fine actually perpetuating anti-Semitism, because Zionism is more important to them than defeating anti-Semitism. They actually need anti-Semitism to be able to justify their existence and Israel's existence as a Jewish state. But yeah, I thought it was cool what she said. She said something about how it's so not, it's not a Jewish value to make other people refugees.
Yeah, and you don't want people to think that's a Jewish value. That's the other thing is it's like, are you really trying to suggest that these are Jewish values? Because it's like one way to make like a lot of people in the world be like, oh, Jews are the worst. As
Yeah,
if
of
you're
course.
like, well, being a Jew means
Right.
doing
Well, I
all the
remember
things the
you.
Israeli government's doing. Like,
Well, you have that story that you told about like drawing. You want to tell that story about drawing a
yeah.
star?
I've told the story, I think, on your show before, but
Yeah.
like, yeah, when I was a kid and I went to Lebanon for the first time that I can remember, I was like 8 years old. I was just drawing shapes with my cousin, like, and I drew a star, and the only way I knew how to draw a star was like 2 triangles, so it makes like a Star of David, basically, without me knowing I drew a Star of David. And my cousin like freaked out and went and got her mom, and her mom, my aunt, came and was just like, oh my God. And I was like, what happened? And she's like, that's a really bad symbol. Like, you can't draw that. Like, that's a symbol of like the people who bomb us.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I mean, what more do you need? Like, than a fighter jet or tanks that have like a Star of David, or
Right.
using it as graffiti. Like, my grandmother's house was occupied by Israeli soldiers, my aunt's house, and they like drew a Star of David and like, trashed the place, and that's what they leave behind, So it's like, people in the region, of course, they're going to conflate like Jews with that if that's the only Jews they know.
Right. And if Israel claims to be the Jewish state and to be acting on behalf of the Jews. And yeah, so I think that I agree with what this woman said, Lily, whatever her name is, who just stepped down. And I do think it's an ethical question and a moral question, but also a self-interest question.
Yeah.
And I think, luckily, I think it's changing more and more. People are understanding that there are Jews who really reject Zionism, or they're Jews who aren't even necessarily anti-Zionist, but are very critical of Israel.
Right.
At least.
Her name is, I see Brad is saying her name's Lily Greenberg, the one who resigned. You should get her on your show, Katie.
Yeah, I'd love to. Lily, if you're watching. And she was like an old school, like she did like a bunch of, I can't remember. She did stuff with Israel, like with the Israeli government. She did like internships or PR or something. She was like a dyed-in-the-wool American Jewish Zionist. Yeah. So this is a interesting, a big deal.
I mean, Israel's alienating like the people that it tried so hard to like indoctrinate and sort of like bring into the network of like pro-Israel activism. So that says a lot too about why they're so desperate. Like, no wonder they're so desperate, because they're losing people like that.
Yep. Well, tell us more about what happened to your family, whose houses were occupied by.
So my family is not from South Lebanon, like, which is what actually like experienced the most brutal of Israel's occupation. But the area my family's from, like, was probably as far. It's not in the north; it's like in the middle of Lebanon, but it's probably like maybe as far north as Israel. As the Israeli soldiers went, that was in 1982 when the Israelis invaded Lebanon. They like really went like deep in. They took the capital. Like, my family lives about 45 minutes outside the capital in the suburbs of it. And in their village was like, or the houses like in my grandmother's village were occupied by Israeli soldiers. And she went to go check on her house one day. She would always tell this story. She went to go check on the house one day in the middle of the war, because like the Israelis, basically I'm from the mountains, and the Israelis had taken this point in the mountains that was quite strategic, which is where my grandmother's family is from. And so she went to go check on her house, and there was Israeli soldiers in it, and she was pissed, and she yelled at them, and she told them, how dare you? This is so shameful. And then the interesting part too is like, so my family is Lebanese Druze. Druze, if you don't know, is like a minority sect that basically just, you'll only find them in Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine. And in Palestine, a lot of them got Israeli citizenship, and they serve in like the police forces and in the military. And they're really useful for the Israelis because they obviously speak Arabic. And so one of them started speaking to her in Arabic, and he turned out to be an Israeli Druze soldier. And then she got even angrier, and she was like, you traitor. Like she would always tell this story. And also that, and in a weird way, that kind of speaks to the way that like Israel's creation in the region really sectarianized like a lot of it. It was like the first really sectarian state implanted in the region. So yeah, I mean, that's the story that she would just always tell. And then she yelled at them, and she was like, and they took a shit. Like, I walked in the room, and there's like a star. They had like painted Stars of David. Someone had taken a shit. They love to do that in homes. I don't know why. It's like a way to just like spit on people, I guess.
Right. Most moral army in the world.
She and my grandmother, may she rest in peace, insisted that she yelled at them so much that she made them clean up after themselves.
Oh, wow. That's great.
And then she like left, because what's she going to do? They have guns. But yeah, she would tell that story. So like, yeah, I just, and I mean, that's not an unusual story. That's probably the nicest story you'll hear of interactions with Israeli soldiers. It doesn't usually go that well. And what they did in South Lebanon's horrible, but yeah, There's Lebanese people who have way more horrible stories of like all kinds of torture and, you know, deaths and all kinds of terror that was inflicted by the Israelis.
Right. Well, Rania, you recently were on Piers Morgan, and I also had Rama Zain to talk about her experience on Piers Morgan. And let's play a little clip of you on Piers Morgan's show where you definitely made an impact.
There is clear genocidal intent from Hamas, isn't there?
Well, Piers, I have a list here of all of the genocidal statements by high-level Israeli officials that the South Africans did a very good job of presenting a case about.
Would you then condemn what Hamas did on October the 7th or not?
I don't condemn Palestinian armed resistance groups.
I find it incredibly hypocritical to hear Rania talk about settler colonialism when in fact she herself is Lebanese, and the only entity that's acting as a colonialist entity in the Middle East is the Islamic Republic of Iran, which has essentially colonized Lebanon and completely destroyed it.
I just want to point out that I'm not at all surprised by anything Emily said, because she herself is a settler, so of course she feels entitled to pontificate about a region that I actually am indigenous to. They're using October 7th to justify a genocide. What are Palestinians justified
I'm not using it to justify anything.
Hold on, Piers. You want me to condemn Hamas in order for you all to feel empathy for over 13,000 Palestinian children who have been slaughtered?
That's not what I said.
It's essentially what I'm hearing here.
No, you're not. You're not listening. Well, then listen harder.
I'm not going to sit here.
Listen more carefully.
I'm not going to sit here and condemn colonized people. I'm just not. It's not going to happen. You can sit here and try to twist your words to weaponize your condemnation.
But you keep talking about Israel. Okay.
If you're going to say what Israel's doing is a response to October 7th, then could October 7th perhaps have been a response to what Israel's been doing to Palestinians, which nobody was covering on October 4th or October 5th or October 6th? I refuse to condemn Hamas. I'm not going to keep having this conversation with you.
You just said I put words in your mouth.
You did put words in my mouth.
Okay.
Piers, I know that I stand on the right side of history by opposing a genocide, and you are an accomplice to it by sitting here and propagandizing
whatever. You can use any you can use all that bullshit. You can bullshit that stuff as much as you like, but
wow, this is incredibly aggressive. I will give you just sit here and bully me, but you're just a bunch of genocide.
I'll give you one last chance to just answer a simple question. Do you think what happened on October the 7th was justified, yes or no?
Do you think Israel's ethnic cleansing and apartheid
gave you the chance? You're not going to answer. Thank you all for coming on.
I'm giving you the chance, and you're not.
Thank you all for coming on Uncensored. I appreciate it.
Wow. So I mean, Piers Morgan, like his entire shtick is asking people to condemn Hamas without ever asking them to condemn the people on the other side, to condemn the Israeli army, the IDF, the Israeli government. He himself has never condemned them as terrorists.
No,
he says, which is like, he even said once with Cornel West, and you and Cornel West are the only people I've actually seen. No, that's not true. A bunch of people have challenged him, but you and Cornel West, I guess, stand out in the way you push back against him, because Cornel West was like, will you condemn the IDF as terrorists? And Piers Morgan was like, I've already said that they're borderline. It borders on. He's like, you're a free man. This is your show. You're Piers Morgan Uncensored. Speak the truth. Why are you, because he was obviously refusing to say that. And you asked him that at the end, and he refused to respond to that question.
Yeah, and also, like, look, with the whole condemnation of Hamas, I mean, it's all just like a distraction. Like, what am I supposed to condemn? Am I supposed to condemn, like, okay, I made the slave analogy, and I did that. I was prepared to do that. And I did that for a reason, because I genuinely think, like, all of these people, because there's people who will do this. They'll go on Piers' show or someone else's, and they'll say, yes, of course I condemn Hamas. Next question. Yeah. And okay, fine. Okay. But like, then you're just like, what would you be doing if this was like the 1800s? Like, would you be condemning slave revolts? Like, would you condemn what slaves in Haiti did? Because you know what? Like, I completely reject the idea that Hamas like attacked civilians on October 7th. I think they did. It looks like they really did try to attack military targets. And one thing I don't get about that is, like, everyone's always like, oh, Israel can attack military targets and there's collateral damage. I don't know why Hamas doesn't get to have collateral damage. That only applies to the colonial occupier for some reason. But that said, slave revolts did involve killing plantation owner families. It did. That's what Nat Turner's rebellion was. They killed all of them. I mean,
babies, kids,
that. You don't have to endorse that, because nobody wants violence. But if you're creating a situation where you're making people live in conditions that are not tolerable for life, then it is your fault. Like any Israeli children or any Israeli women who are killed, any civilians in Israel who are killed, is the fault of Israel because they created the conditions of colonialism. And the conditions of colonialism result in extreme levels of violence. And that includes the people that you are trying to kill. They will, if you try to kill people, they will try to survive and they will use any means necessary. So like, I just, this is why I refuse. I won't condemn Hamas. Like I won't condemn Hamas because it's not on Hamas. Israel has created the conditions for a war. Israel has created the conditions for like perpetual war and perpetual violence where a lot of people are going to die. And every single one of them is on Israel's hands until this occupation and this colonialism stops. Like that's where the conversation needs to be. You want the violence to stop? I do too. I don't want anyone to be killed. I'm not like, yay, let's go on a kill fest. No, it's just Israel needs to stop doing what it's doing. And until then, this is going to continue. So I just like, and I saw, I mean, I'm not even going to say names. I just saw some people analyzing what I said and they're like, she should have just condemned Hamas. It's so easy. I'm not going to do it. Like, I'm not going to condemn indigenous people. I'm not going to condemn slaves. I'm not going to do it. And those people who want to sit here and pretend they're pro-Palestine, again, if it was 1830, they would be condemning a slave revolt because the slaves who were revolting didn't behave like angels. Like, could you imagine? Could you imagine that being the take? Nobody would say that today.
I mean, I think that there are people that are principled, like going back to Cornel West. Like, I think there's a range of ways that one can respond to this. Cornel West is like, I condemn the killing of civilians, but he makes it clear that one side does this much more than the other. I condemn the killing of civilians, but Israel has a terrorist army. I condemn the killing of civilians, but this is an occupation. Like, so I think that when people want to do it that way, I think that's acceptable. I'm not saying how like everyone has to do it. I'm not saying I disagree with your take. I'm just saying that I think there are ways for people to condemn, you know, like some people are pacifists, but that doesn't mean you abandon the cause of Palestinians. I think that was something that was tested on October 7th.
And I'm not even talking about Cornel West here, though. I think the way that he plays it and the way he argues works for him, and that's great. I guess it's more like, and I just like don't want to sit here and get petty and like attack people personally because that's not what I want to do at all. It's more just we have to understand how the real world works.
Right.
And the real world does not work in the way that some people think it should, where, okay, if Palestinians are going to resist, then they have to do it in this perfect way. And anything outside of the bounds of this perfect way that I say is how you should do it from my armchair is condemnable. Is just ridiculous and naive and stupid.
Well, yeah, and I think
that's what I'm talking about. Like,
yeah, and I think that also kind of going back to what you said, if you care about civilians and you care about innocent people and you care about the killings of civilians, you'd be, first of all, constantly up in arms about what Israel's doing. But also, like you said, you'd want this occupation to end because uprisings and violence are inevitable. And of course, not even to mention that so much Palestinian resistance is not violent. And as we saw from the March of Return, you get mowed down when you're like resisting nonviolently. So that's an important part of it too. But I do think, look, like Gideon Levy, who I'm sure would disagree with what you're saying, he himself was like, you can't, like Israel can't imprison 2 million people and not pay a cost. You know what I mean?
Like what happens to somebody and the thing, like, okay, like what happens to somebody who's if you kill someone's entire family, like we have movies about this, like where somebody's had their
and they're the heroes and then the heroes in the movie
and they go on a revenge spree. It's like, and I'm not even saying Palestinians even really do that, but like if you put people in that condition and then after like their whole family's been killed and they've been starved and they've been traumatized for the rest of their lives, you're like, oh my God, they didn't do resistance like I think it should be done.
Yeah.
It's just like, wow.
And I also think it's important to like have a radical flank in the discussion. Like we need to have people saying what you said. And like it has to, because we have to move the acceptable limits of debate. You know what I'm saying? If no one says it that way, then everything is shifted to the right or shifted towards Israel, because people are constantly saying like what the equivalent of what you said, but for Israelis.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Well,
like
for Israelis, it's like they can just kill everyone and it's fine. It's like there's no problem. Everyone's collateral damage, like a hospital.
Right, exactly. And that doesn't stand out though, because people aren't asked to condemn Israel. I mean, it's insane. It's just not a question that's asked the way that it is of Hamas.
No, it's not.
So I think
Israel,
you did a really important thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Also, can I just say, like, on a bit of a petty conspiratorial note,
yeah,
I would love to be as tan as I am in that segment and that episode, but I'm not that tan. Like, I mean, you saw me a few days.
Are you saying they color corrected you, or did they like darken your skin?
Maybe the lighting was weird. Maybe the lighting was weird.
I see you're saying.
I don't mind it. I love it. I love.
Well, when you saw yourself, and I know I really could use some, but when you saw yourself like in the mirror, were you like, oh, I'm a little too dark here, or do you think they did something in post?
I mean, maybe I think
you
either
did look
the lighting.
Tanner,
it was maybe the lighting.
Your hair looked darker. Your eyebrows looked a lot darker too. Sometimes they overdo. I mean, you look great. You look great.
Yeah, thank you. No, I think I look fantastic with a nicer tan. I'm good.
What
with
if they had
hair.
put something like really racist like on in
I didn't
post-production?
I did have a few people message me being like, "Did they darken you?"
Yeah, but I mean, what if they'd put something on? Like, they could have done
I just
like
look, if they did darken me, it was in my favor because it just showed the radical difference between me and that white girl from LA who thinks
Emily?
that Israel is her land. Yeah, Emily.
Right. Who's married to that psychotic guy?
No. So apparently this is my friend told me this, so I need to go double check.
Okay.
But apparently they're not married
news.
because they can't get married in Israel, because in Israel you can't get married if you're not the same religion.
Well, because you need I know you need an Orthodox rabbi to marry you. So he'd have
I mean, look, Lebanon's similar. People who are different sects, they go and get married in Cyprus.
Right. Yeah, that's what,
So, I mean, I'm not like, I'm just saying for the only democracy in the Middle East.
Well, exactly. Lebanon doesn't claim to be. Wait, but he's Palestinian, right? Or is
he's Israeli,
Israeli Arab.
It has Israeli citizenship, and he's I think he wants you to know he's Christian. I'm not sectarian. Him. He just really wants you to know that. And he basically works as like a propagandist for the Israel.
And like harasses like anti-Zionist Jews.
Yes. Yeah. You're a bad Jew, Katie.
Yeah.
That's what he would say to you.
They're so psychotic.
Not a good Jew like Emily who picked up and moved to Israel after she finished college.
Oh, she's from LA?
Or I don't know if she's from LA. She's from the West
US.
Coast, and she went to University of Southern California, USC.
Nice.
I looked her up before I had to debate her because I was like, who's this lady?
Emily Schrader and Yosef Hadid.
I think she's definitely seems to be auditioning for like Israeli spokesperson.
Right. Yeah, she was. Okay, I found an article. Brad, can I send you an article? We didn't plan this, but can I send you an article? Or do you want me to screen share it? All right, I'm going to text Brad the article because I just want people to see this heartwarming coverage of them. And I'll add in I'll add in a clip of the guy being insane. But here we go. This is an article in the Jewish Chronicle. And it's called Me and You, Emily Schrader and Yosef Hadad. We argued about saying I love you.
Yeah, I read this article.
Yeah. Let's just take a look. Let's see. We scroll down a little bit. Here they are.
She looks so indigenous there. To the Levant. She
was born in LA and made Aliyah 7 years ago. That means when you move to Israel. She runs a digital marketing agency and is a prominent social media activist for Israel. The 30-year-old also works for Vouch for Each Other, an organization set up to promote peaceful dialogue between Jews and Arabs in Israel. Its founder, Yosef Hadad, 36, an Arab Israeli who was born in Haifa but grew up in Nazareth, is also a prominent speaker about Israel, going to parliaments and university campuses around the world. The pair got engaged in May last year, and the JC caught up with them on a speaking tour of the UK and Ireland. Yeah, who was he harassing on Piers Morgan's show?
Him? Oh, was he on Piers Morgan?
Yeah. I didn't know. Oh my God. He was would not shut up. And it was someone, maybe it wasn't Abby Martin. I don't know. It was someone else.
No, Abby Martin had to debate some other psychotic person. Look, I have to say this about Piers Morgan. I think he's ridiculous, and he's definitely obviously in it with Israel. But it is the only program that will have people on who say things like me or Abby or Cornel West, or I hope at some point he has you on.
Yeah.
And so you can tell him.
And you also were, by the way, it was you, Pierce, Emily and that other girl. It was like 3 against 1. And then it was that Israeli guy who's like, I think Irish or English. I'm not sure. But
he's definitely not
not indigenous.
His accent
Israel.
wasn't Hebrew, so I don't think he was born in Israel.
And he's the one whose daughter was kidnapped and then released. And he's the one who said, like, when he found out she was kidnapped, he wished she was dead.
Yeah.
Because like Hamas, and then he went off during the segment. It was so gross because Piers Morgan was like, "What did you hear what Rania had to say?" And he was just like talking about all these rapes that happened as if there were evidence of it.
Israel can't find its hostages, but this guy seems to know. He said the craziest thing unchallenged. He said that Israel that they're being raped by terrorists every day, and they're being impregnated with, he said, terrorist babies.
Right.
And he was like, and then he was like, and they're gonna come home and they're gonna have to bring them to term.
He was so empathetic towards these like non-existent phenomenon, as if there's this whole thing, like a whole tribe of women coming home pregnant. It was like crazy. So weird. Yeah.
It went completely unchallenged. He faked cried. Like he literally fake cried at one point.
Well, someone put in, he thought she might be a sex slave, which I think is because they really try so hard to make it seem like ISIS.
You know what's crazy is and then I actually have to like run after this because I have to go have dinner with my family, but I just want to tell you about that girl Emily. I'll find it and send it to you. So I tweeted out some of the really disgusting, I mostly got a lot of support for going on Piers' show. But I did get some like hate mail, and the hate mail was like really graphic fantasies of like me being like violently like chopped into pieces, just horrible things that I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was just like, wow, someone took the time out of their day to write this. So I tweeted it out, and Emily like quote tweeted it, and she said that I was playing the victim. And it was like, if she tweeted out something like that, people sent her that shit, I just wouldn't respond. I wouldn't say anything.
You're right. You'd ignore it. Yeah.
But she literally, I like have to find this. She literally like quote tweeted it.
Yeah. They are very proprietary about victimhood. They're the only victims. They're professional victims. Yeah.
Yeah. They really are. Hang on.
Someone put it in the chat, by the way. I don't know whether just block and delete, but I think it's so funny because someone wrote, while we're talking about this stuff, someone writes, "You ignorant sluts."
Oh,
what do you think is wrong with that? Like, can you imagine being a woman in that person's life?
You ignorant slut.
Like, I feel bad for his mom, sister, all the women he knows.
I mean,
like, imagine going there. It's just so weird. You ignorant
of all the things to
like,
say,
you people who don't know and have a lot of sex.
It's also just what you say when you have like no ability to
nothing
argue.
Substantive. Right.
Sorry, I'm going through this woman's Twitter feed, and a lot of it is about how happy she is Raisi died.
Oh wow.
The Iranian president.
Yeah.
She's really happy about that.
Yeah.
I'm sure that was a great day for her. Oh, she's attacking my friend. That sounds like about right. This Lebanese journalist that she clearly doesn't like and probably wants him to be killed. This girl's nasty. Like, why is she
really is. And
why is she such a bad person?
Yeah. You can tell
Jesus Christ, chill out.
They really are a match made in heaven, she and that guy.
She's like she kind of reminds me of like a Nazi, honestly.
She has Nazi coloring. Oh, let's see. What do we got here? So Brad found
it.
Okay. Oh, you've got it. Okay.
Yeah,
so the settler woman who thinks she's native to the Middle East and appears to be auditioning for Israeli spokesperson thinks people are dumb enough to believe Iran is colonizing the region while Israel has colonized the region for its entire existence. And then Emily writes, the arrogance of this Hezbollah-loving clown. First of all, there's a hyphen missing. Hezbollah-loving clown, Rania Khalek, even using Iran to refer to the terrorist actions of the Islamic Republic of Iran, as if she has even the faintest idea what's going on in her own country, is imperialist AF. How many million Iranians need to scream from the rooftops, this regime is not Iran? Not to mention the fact she's flat out denying the horrors that the IR has inflicted across the ME and beyond. Shame on you, Rania. Wait, but
unlike
I don't understand.
Israel,
like,
which has inflicted no horrors.
Yeah,
by the way.
But also Israel is you can call it the Jewish Republic of Israel. But how are they imperialist anyway? I don't even understand. How is Iran imperialist? Like,
it's
you can
not,
say whatever
unless
you
don't know what
it
imperialism
repressive.
is.
Like, you can call it. You can say whatever you want. Like, there are plenty of things you can say that are critical of Iran. But the imperial, like, do these people just not know what that means?
I don't think they know what colonialism and imperialism means. I think they're just hearing Israel be accused of it. So they're like, we're just going to accuse Iran of the same thing. She literally told me Iran is colonizing Lebanon. I live in Lebanon, you guys. I have never seen Iranian
That's because
like
they
settlers
hide
in
really
Lebanon.
well.
I don't know what the hell she's talking about. Anyways, Katie, I love you and I love your show, but I have to go or my family's gonna be very angry with me.
Yeah. We
But
can't have any Jew
no. There's already too much strife.
Yeah, too much strife. Yeah. Well, Rania, where can people find you?
You guys can find me at Breakthrough News. Follow Breakthrough News on YouTube, at BT Newsroom on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok. I think it's also at BT Newsroom. I love the people I work with, and we're putting out a lot of content. So thank you for having me, Katie.
Thanks, Rania. Have a great night. Okay, that was Rania Khalek. And make sure you follow her on Twitter and also her stuff on YouTube and also Breakthrough News. And Brad is back. Yeah.
Katie,
Hey, Brad.
Do you want to show one more Rania tweet?
Yeah.
This was the one that she had sent us.
Okay.
Wait a second. Let me.
No, I think, is that?
Yeah, I have to switch windows here. 1 second. Okay.
I'm your cousin, best friend, Nate. Okay, let's see what we got here. All right, so
this was the one where
Rania
had wrote about the horrific messages that she'd been receiving.
Got it. Yeah, let's see. So let's scroll down. I just want to give people a sense. I'm gonna cut. I won't.
I mean, I'm hesitant because it is truly terrible.
All right. I know, but I think it's important. Just scroll down, please, because I think it's important for people to see the type of stuff that she's. Yeah. Okay, so you should suck on the barrel of. I'm not going to say it. You Jew-hating C word. I hope you're. Yeah, it's like the grossest, most sexually violent stuff ever. Really sexually violent.
Yeah.
And wishing rape. What is up with Zionists wishing rape on people? Like they do that all the time. All the time. It's really. It's like in that video that I made.
Right, and I think that part of it, at least on the government's part, it's just projection because. Unlike what they say about Palestinians, like Biden reiterating the long debunked stuff of systemic rape and whatnot, there's actually documentation of that being perpetrated against Palestinian women. So.
Right. Yeah.
But as to why like random women marching in the street in America go there, that's just, it's messed up.
Yeah. So Rania tweets some screenshots of this like deplorable, misogynist, sexually violent, gross stuff. Yeah. And Emily, like if I hated someone and thought their politics sucked and saw them tweet this stuff, I would just ignore it because I wouldn't want to like stand and I wouldn't, I would ignore it because I think it would look bad for me to like, in other words, I wouldn't respond. I wouldn't like actively condone the stuff that had been said.
Right.
But she writes classic projection and delusions of grandeur. She doesn't know how to use the English language. How is that delusions of grandeur? There's no grandeur. Standing up for Palestine by defending the mullah-backed terror group Hamas that's shooting Palestinians and stealing their aid and resources. You aren't pro-Palestinian, Rania. You act and speak like a modern-day Nazi, then whine about the hate from strangers you receive. You're not a victim. Grow up. Like it's basically suggesting like that's what you get for making the statements you want to that you've made.
Yeah, and to me, like if this person, if they're Emily's disagreement here was simply, some politics type disagreement and whatnot, you would think that as a fellow human being, as a fellow woman, she could differentiate that and acknowledge like, hey, that's not right.
Right.
To then, say these vile things to this person, but clearly, along with not being able to use the English language,
right?
She won't even. Yeah,
she's a syntactical imperialist. Yeah.
Okay. Bye.
Bye, Brad. Okay. Well, thanks, guys, so much. You're going to be so happy you stuck around because we have another guest, and we're going to get into so much interesting stuff. He is none other than Michael Tracey. You can find him on Twitter. You can find him on the Substack, and he's written for lots of places, including Vice. He was even at the Young Turks, which he refers to on his Substack bio as a peculiar experience. So let us bring on to the show Michael Tracey. Hi, Michael. How are you?
Peculiar experience, but let's not get sidetracked into that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. So Michael, you've been tweeting a lot about let me back up. Obviously, as everyone knows, Biden is identifies as a Zionist. he does that frequently. He does that proudly. He likes to remind people of it all the time. And he's obviously enabling Israel. But you've been tweeting a lot about Trump's relationship with Israel and also the relationship of MAGA with Israel, because support for Israel is obviously bipartisan, but the Republicans are actually worse. And you, in fact, tweeted out part of a bill introduced by two Republican members of Congress, Guy Rechtschneider of Pennsylvania and Max Miller of Ohio. We'll throw up a screenshot of that bill. But can you talk about this bill and what it would do?
Yeah, so just to set the scene in terms of the differences between Republicans and Democrats on Israel, you're right that in practice there isn't all that much of a difference because on a bipartisan basis, they all unite behind the most staunchly pro-Israel policy imaginable. And in fact, in some ways, I would theorize that it's more advantageous for Israel to have an ardently pro-Israel Democrat in the White House as opposed to Republicans, because it kind of tamps down on criticism and pushback. Like, if Trump were in power, right, during this whole war saga, he just acts as an accelerant on everything. So you would have had probably even greater protest movements, not just on college campuses, but elsewhere. I mean, think of like the George Floyd protest, but on steroids, right? So a Democrat being in office tends to neutralize or deflate some of that pushback that would otherwise exist. But that's sort of another issue. In terms of Republicans versus Democrats vis-a-vis Israel, even though they both land on the same policy position usually, what's notable about the Republican pro-Israel position now is, number one, it's more unanimous. I mean, you have at least a small faction of Democrats who will at least occasionally pretend or posture to be critical of Israel, and then you'll have like one or two who actually are seemingly critical of Israel, like, you know, Rashida Tlaib or something. On the Republican side, that's virtually non-existent, with maybe the exception of Thomas Massie.
Right.
That's the one exception. So it's like 99% of Republicans versus 97% of Democrats or something, who are just unabashedly, unwaveringly, unswervingly pro-Israel in every instance. But if you look at Trump's posture toward Israel, it's more extreme in the sense that it's geared toward the fanatical religious elements in Israel, right? So a Chuck Schumer is obviously a hardline pro-Israel, basically secular Jew in an American context. I mean, maybe he considers himself religious, but
yeah, and he did say that the problem is they don't follow the Torah.
Yeah, but so he's like maybe he's a
liberal reform. I assume he's reform, but he could be conservative too. But yes,
exactly.
He's not a fundamentalist,
right? But so he and, you know, even Biden or Obama or somebody, Pelosi, they would have not associated with the elements that are now growing in political prominence and influence within Israel who are clinging to Trump. So just to give you an example, there's this party, the Shas party, which is what they call ultra-Orthodox within Israel. And I was in Israel shortly after October 7th, and I would talk to people who are supporters of Shas, so all religious Jews. They call them religious. In Israel, you're considered a religious Jew, not just when you're religious in the sense that we conceive of it, but when you're in the Orthodox Jewish kind of cultural and religious milieu. It's not just that you're a believer, right? It's a different connotation to the terminology. And they just instinctively loved Trump. They were pleasantly surprised that Biden seemed to be following suit, but their visceral love and attachment was for Trump. And so there are people in Israel, ultra-Orthodox, which is an expansive term. It encompasses different sects. I mean, there's endless sects within even that umbrella term. But there are people there who are literally plotting to rebuild the third temple, meaning to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque in the old city of Jerusalem in the Muslim section, and have that be the site on which the so-called Third Holy Temple will be rebuilt to fulfill this 6,000-year Jewish prophecy. And so I sent you a clip that I hadn't even seen this until recently. Trump held at his Bedminster, New Jersey estate last July a fundraising gala for this group called Israel Heritage Foundation, which sounds very innocuous and just like any old pro-Israel organization it could be, right? I mean, it could easily be AIPAC or whatever. No, this is something distinct. This is the rabbi in his old country garb. He's addressing several donors, and he is talking about how very soon he conceives that there will be the third temple rebuilt in Jerusalem, and he praises Trump as the harbinger of the onset of that rebuilding of the third temple. I mean, it's bizarre to even think of Trump in this position, but it's not uncommon in Israel for Trump to be venerated in these incredibly histrionic terms as though he's some world historic savior figure. There's actually a guy in Jerusalem who runs a so-called educational foundation where they're literally putting together logistical plans to rebuild the third temple, where he sells a commemorative shekel with Trump's visage on it and transposes it onto the visage of the biblical King Cyrus from thousands of years ago, and puts Trump in the same pantheon because of how amazing they believe it to be and how prophetic they believe it to be that Trump moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem.
Right.
That was something that even Republicans in a prior era would have been resistant to, like the Bush family. And people forget the first president to actually endorse, at least nominally and superficially, the establishment of the Palestinian state was George W. Bush.
Right.
And George W. Bush's father, of course, withheld loan guarantees to Israel in the early 90s if they didn't cease certain settlement activity. Now, it didn't amount to anything much. But the point is, the prevailing Republican tendency before Trump would have been they would have kept like arm's distance from these more messianic elements that are genuinely fanatical. I mean, in Trump, at that opening of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem, which he still brags about as one of his big accomplishments and why you ain't Jewish if you don't vote for Republican in November, he had Pastor John Hagee deliver the opening benediction, opening prayer at the ceremony, inaugurating the opening of that U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. And John Hagee, you probably are familiar with him at least somewhat, right? I mean, he has a genuinely apocalyptic vision where he is telling his follower, he preaches regularly that the Gog and Magog war is upon us and that end times are imminent and that Christ will return to rule over earth from Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And that's why he supports Israel, right?
And he had to, John McCain had to distance himself from him because there's recording of Hagee saying that God sent Hitler to be a hunter. And that's what made the Jews go to Israel. So basically saying the Holocaust was part of God's plan to get Jews there.
I mean, not that I'm a fan of Hagee, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, Hagee basically.
But I mean, that is what he said. Like, you can't, you don't have to think it's. I mean, that is what he said. I think that
with Hagee's theology is that he believes that there's this everlasting covenant between God and the Jewish people, and it's through the Jewish people that Christ will return. Right. So he's saying that every travail, every misfortune that Jews experience is ultimately part of God's plan.
Right.
So
which is what everyone really believes in.
I mean, it's goofy and blinkered, but it's not like he's. I mean, you sometimes see liberals try to use Hagee against conservatives, saying, "Oh, they're the real anti-Semites because they exalt a Hagee who's actually anti-Semitic. He wants to convert all Jews. I mean, he actually doesn't want that, but it doesn't even matter. Like the fine points of the theology are kind of not relevant. The point is that these are the people who Trump eagerly embraces into his coalition, and again, these are people who, in like 10 years ago, mainline Republicans would have kept their distance from.
Right.
And
he was at the Unite. He was at the what was the march that like Brett Gelman spoke at? You know, the pro-Israel
the march
rally.
For Hagee. Yeah, Hagee Hagee did the prayer at the March for Israel.
Yeah, March for Israel, which like Hakeem Jeffries was at, Schumer
Everybody was there.
Brett
Schumer,
Gelman was at, Deborah Messing was at,
Mike Johnson was there, Michael Rappaport.
I mean, it's not surprising Mike Johnson's there, right? Because he's an evangelical, a similar vein to
Yeah,
Hagee. But it is
Schumer
funny
and
that,
Jeffries, right.
Schumer, Jeffries, and, Rappaport, and
Anyway, going back to that legislation, which, as one does, I was just sifting through the latest bills that have been introduced in Congress because I'm a very strange person. I don't recommend that people emulate my way of life.
But it's good
this
for
is
us.
what I do. Yeah. And I saw that those two Republican congressmen had introduced this bill to basically equalize the disbursement of benefits that U.S. military service members are entitled to under certain employment law. Where, for example, if you enlist in the U.S. military and you go overseas, you can get your loan repayments frozen, or you can get certain guarantees about re-employment once you return. You can get certain protections under employment law and housing, etc. A whole slew of benefits. And these two members of Congress want to afford Americans who go and serve in the IDF those same benefits as though they had just served in the U.S. military.
So great.
And Max Miller, who's one of the sponsors, he was essentially handpicked and placed into office by Trump, because Max Miller, he's only 35. So a lot of Republicans and conservatives online, like, they'll try to say, oh, the pro-Israel zealotry, that's just something that's unique to like the conservative boomers, right? The Fox News obsessives. No, I mean, a lot of the most hardcore people are actually like 40 and under. Elise Stefanik, Max Miller, and others. Elise Stefanik is basically campaigning for vice president by going to the Knesset in Israel and denouncing Biden and saying how much better and more extreme Trump will be in his fealty to Israel, which he's probably correct about. But Max Miller was he was endorsed by Trump very early in the 2022 cycle, because Max Miller had worked on the Trump campaign as like an advance man, and then had worked in the White House doing like advance work for Trump. So he had like a personal relationship with Trump. He got married in Trump's Bedminster estate, the same estate in New Jersey where Trump had hosted that function for the extreme Messianic Jewish group.
Right.
And Max Miller's wife, he got married to with Trump basically presiding over the ceremony, is the daughter of the guy who then won the Republican Senate primary nomination in Ohio with also Trump's endorsement. So it's like a whole incestuous thing. And Trump put him in there. And Max Miller runs around. He got elected on a pledge that he was going to help Trump advance the quote America First agenda. That's the ground on which also Trump explicitly endorsed him. So apparently advancing the America First agenda includes carving out benefit structures for Americans who go and serve in a foreign military, which is the Israeli military. Now, in fairness to Max Miller, I don't think he even views Israel as a foreign country. I mean, I think a misconception here is that these people think that like there's like a cognitive dissonance where Israel's a foreign country, but they kind of believe that you can be America first and also pro-Israel. They don't think of Israel as a foreign country. They think of it as an extension of American power, which is not entirely wrong, and an extension of American hegemony, which exists at the pleasure of American power, which is, again, I think a plausible theory, but that tells you, that kind of gives you some insight to how they can reconcile this. But yeah, Max Miller, he's one of the most hardcore pro-Israel people in the whole Republican conference in the House, which is really saying something. And he's the one running around with the America First mantle, and he always boasts about his endorsement by Trump and whatnot. So this is not me making a pro-Biden argument by any stretch. I'm not voting for any of them, right, including RFK Jr. But I do think it is worth analyzing the differences in the coalitional makeup between the Republican nominee and the Democratic nominee in terms of like what's guiding their decision making, in terms of how they manifest their pro-Israel ardor, because it's just a slightly different for the Republicans and Trump, where they really are backed by some of the most extreme fanatical elements. I mean, I guarantee, if you and I were going to go to Jerusalem, not Tel Aviv, Jerusalem is a whole different story. I don't know if you've been to Israel.
Yeah,
you should go. Okay, yeah, I mean, Jerusalem is like a religious. It's like ground zero for every crazed religious person on earth, right? Of any sectarian disposition. And I guarantee every crazy person that I encounter, like the most hardline crazy person who was Jewish in Israel, they were invariably the biggest fans of Trump. Like Trump is supported by the most crazed religious elements. Now, Biden has strong support, but they're more secular Jewish elements of support, right? So it's just a difference, and it gives the Republican position on Israel this more apocalyptic end times tinge when you combine it with the Christian Zionist component, which is also very powerful in the Republican coalition, which is kind of worrisome. Not that the Democratic version of this is particularly hopeful or anything. It's just different in nature.
Right. Yeah. Let's actually play that video of the Rebbe, and then we're gonna talk more about the difference in nature, as you called it. Yeah.
mourn the destruction of the Holy Temple that happened thousands of years ago. Jewish people around the world
So, Katie, this is at Trump's estate
still
in New
mourn
Jersey.
this great
so people know.
loss. And every year during the 3 weeks, we mourn, and when it comes the big day of Tisha B'Av, we cry, and we have the great beliefs that very soon we will be Zoiche, we will all see the building of the third temple in Jerusalem very soon. And we honor our President Trump for what he has done for Jerusalem and for the Jewish people. So when we sit here today, we are helping and sending out a message to the entire world, knowing that Jerusalem is a place that has to be secure for Jews, and we should very soon be able to see the building of the third temple living with coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu b'mheira v'yameinu, amen. We all have great gratitude to this person. This is a person that doesn't care only for himself, but cares for the entire world, and especially for the people in Israel and for the Jews in America. My blessings may the blessings from Israel come upon the president, his family, and all his friends. May God give a long life, a healthy life, a sweet life to our dear president, Mr. Donald J. Trump.
Thank you, Rabbi. I'm glad I told him to do that. He did a very good job. You've done that before, Rabbi, I guess, huh? A couple of times, huh? Thank you very much. Great gentlemen, great people.
Can I bring up Holloway? Come on, John Burkin. Come on, John.
John Burkin, please.
I need.
Sam and Amias.
How about the Congress?
And Mr. Blakeman. Mr. Blakeman. I want you to read this, please.
Okay, good. Please, you go ahead.
We love you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much.
Please read it.
Okay.
Give thanks.
Give thanks to Hashem, for his work is good, his kindness endures forever. Presented to President Donald J. Trump for his extraordinary and heroic efforts, I like that very much, to help the state of Israel and the Jewish people. He and his family should be blessed eternally. From the Israel Heritage Foundation, July 10th, 2023. I want to thank you, Rabbi. That's all.
Wow. So moving. I'm verklempt.
I mean, it's so farcical, Trump reading out a blessing from Hashem.
Yeah.
But, so it's not a matter of Trump being himself a true believer in this stuff, because who knows? I mean, he probably doesn't care all that much.
Yeah.
But he's so eager to welcome them into his coalition and allow them to dictate U.S. foreign policy. I mean, at the Republican Jewish Coalition donor gathering a few weeks after October 7th, one of the rare public events that Trump had made an appearance at in the Republican primary campaign, but he actually gave a call out to Miriam Adelson, the widow of Sheldon Adelson, who was Trump's chief funder through his 2016 and 2020 runs, and also for the Republican Party campaign wings for the House and Senate in 2018 and 2022. Actually, in 2018, Adelson died in 2021, but then his wife is now the steward of his so-called philanthropy, right? Yeah, R.I.P. And Trump called out to Miriam and said, how wonderful she is, and how wonderful her late husband was, and he effectively said, I'm paraphrasing, he said, I did this for you, meaning I moved the embassy to Jerusalem for you. And they were at the ceremony. I think they even paid for some of the construction of the embassy, if I'm not mistaken. So he just, the most fanatical elements have not just a seat at the table with Trump, but are basically running the policy. I mean, in 2020, right around the time of the election, so I don't even remember the scenes at the time. I had to do some research, but Mike Pompeo, for the first time for a top U.S. official, he was Secretary of State, he was operating on behalf of the Trump administration, went to a Jewish settlement in the West Bank for a wine at a winery, had a bottle of wine named after him, presented to him as like a gift. And then he also went to the Golan Heights, where there's a settlement named after Trump Heights. So I mean, and if you go talk to any, I actually spent a day when I was in Israel with genuine Messianic Jewish settlers, and they're a strange bunch. So they're not like political in the traditional sense where like they're really rooting for Republicans versus Democrats, but to the extent that they do have a preference, they all love Trump, and for good reason. So I don't know. I just think people ought to be aware of that, because sometimes you see this school of thought bubbling up, even on the left, of sorts, where they say that Trump has like a more rational perspective on these things, or maybe he'll be the one to rein in Bibi, or he has like so-called like non-interventionist or anti-war instincts, and therefore that makes him superior. I'm not denying that in certain instances that might be legitimate. Like, for example, Trump did buck foreign policy convention and like met with Kim Jong-un.
Right. Much to the dismay.
Palestine, there's no evidence for that whatsoever.
Right. Remember how upset, by the way, Rachel Maddow was when he did that? When he like shook Kim Jong-un's hand, she was like,
she said it was like a scheme.
It was anti-president. It was like defamed the office of the presidency, as if like as if the Iraq War weren't way worse than shaking Kim Jong-un's hand. I mean, that was just I remember that was such a revolting moment of liberal.
Not only that, they claim the Rachel Maddow archetype of Democrat, including Rachel herself, had a whole sprawling theory about how that was just another secret maneuver Trump was making because he was controlled by Putin.
Yeah.
They never really fully filled out that theory, but that's, of course, what they immediately leapt to.
My favorite argument of kind of what Aaron Mate calls blue anon is the argument that Trump should be more, that Trump was both like a Cheeto, what did they call him? Cheeto, Mussolini, demented, erratic dictator, and also should be more belligerent with foreign powers. And Putin's also the same thing. So we want him being more aggressive. Like it just doesn't make, what was the end game there? Just war?
Well, the primary line of criticism.
Benito, that's what it is, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when Trump was in office, Democrats' primary line of criticism against him was that he was not antagonistic enough toward America's adversaries. Now, that stemmed largely from the whole Russia thesis, where Trump was supposedly in collusion with Putin, which, of course, was a nonsense. But that created an incentive for Trump to demonstrate that he was not in hock with Putin by, bombing Syrian air bases or sanctioning Venezuela and trying to overthrow it because it was the chief ally of Russia in the Western Hemisphere, on and on and on, abrogating arms control treaties and so forth. But there's also a version of that happening now with Biden in office, because I guess that's just the ordinary reflexive tendency for any party that's out of power. They criticize the president in office for not being aggressive or antagonistic enough. What was the one thing that Biden probably got the most criticism for the first 2 years? Yes, the Afghanistan withdrawal, including from Trump.
Right.
Trump would go on Sean Hannity's show and say this is the worst disgrace in American history. This never would have happened if I was president. Actually, Mike Pompeo, in his endorsement of Trump, like from a month or so ago, he put out a whole statement through his PAC saying that one of the failures of the Biden administration that never would have happened if Trump was in office is that the Afghan government never would have collapsed under Trump, which makes you think, because the reason the Afghan government collapsed so quickly the minute that the U.S. withdrew is because it was basically, a house of cards, right? Or built on sand, or whatever the metaphor is that you want to use. And so the only way that government could not have collapsed is if the U.S. had never withdrawn.
Right,
so
of course, yeah.
Pompeo, who was the Secretary of State, who was like probably more intensively involved in the policy minutia than Trump was, is saying that under Trump there wouldn't have been a withdrawal, even though he was going around campaigning or presenting as though he was disenchanted with the perpetual wars and whatnot. So yeah, I mean, so you have, and even Trump now. What's Trump's main position on Gaza or the Israel war, as far as anybody can discern? It's that Israel should have pulverized Gaza harder and faster, and should have imposed more restrictions so that the imagery of the destruction couldn't have been distributed because that's affected global public opinion in a way that is adverse to Israel. Right.
Which is why they shut down Al Jazeera.
Right. And, Trump also had like a weird personal grudge against Netanyahu.
Right. Because he didn't help him kill Soleimani. Right.
Well, I don't think even so. It's so much that. No, it's not. It's not that because they still had a good rapport.
Oh, I thought that's what he was mad at
No,
him
it's
for.
that Netanyahu congratulated Biden for winning
Right.
the 2020 election.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so Trump and Biden haven't. Trump and Netanyahu haven't spoken reportedly since November of 2020. Now, looks like there could be just this week a thaw in relations because Elise Stefanik, one of Trump's, ultra MAGA supporters, self-described, was in Israel giving a speech at the Knesset where she's denouncing Biden for supposedly withdrawing aid to Israel, which Biden hasn't done. I mean, that's another fiction. And saying that Trump would be even more extreme in his deference to the most kind of bombastic elements in Israel. And there was also a delegation apparently led by Trump's final national security advisor, who's still on good terms with Trump, unlike Bolton, right? Who met with Netanyahu and is now they're doing like some entreaties to kind of restore ties or something.
Should we take a look at
the point is Trump is denouncing Biden for not being extreme enough, not being aggressive enough on Israel, and even to some extent on Ukraine. So it's an inversion of how Democrats critiqued Trump when Trump was in power, except without the sprawling espionage conspiracy.
Right. Should we play Stefanik?
Yeah, do it.
Talking in Israel.
As long as I serve the American people, I will defend George Washington's vision of religious pluralism and freedom. Today, this means crushing anti-Semitism at home.
I love the idea.
And supplying the state of Israel with what it needs, when it needs it, without conditions to achieve total victory in the face of evil.
I love the idea that religious pluralism requires supporting Israel without conditions.
And
the Jewish state.
I should have maybe included this part in my little montage that I spliced up, but she started off the George Washington segue by claiming that American support for Israel literally stems to the era of George Washington because of like some this like folklore about how George Washington received a letter from the rabbi of Newport, Rhode Island or something. But she was trying to connect that to the U.S. support for the state of Israel circa 1948, which is amazing. I'm sorry, I really find it difficult to bear Elise Stefanik more than most politicians. I don't know why. Maybe I am a misogynist because she doesn't have that views that are much distinct from like Republican pro-Israel, male pro-Israel hawk. Right. But she's so brazen and cynical in her pandering. Like she's somebody who you should go read this New York Times profile of hers that was done of her.
I did.
Oh, you did?
This week, like this weekend or last week?
No, this is from January of 2023.
Oh, okay.
Where it goes into her history at Harvard, where like she was basically this like moderate Republican who was going to bring lots of women into the party. She's going around recruiting women. She had like she was moderate on social issues, so like she was in favor of like federal protections for gay marriages and whatever. And then all of a sudden, like a flip switch during Trump's impeachment, when she realized she got a huge amount of attention and fundraising money by just being the most ostentatious, kind of just brash defender of Trump. And then now she's actually going around self-identifying as ultra MAGA. Right. When she's somebody, and that tells you how flexible this whole notion of MAGA or America First is, because she's somebody who started out her career at the at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, which is the most like ardent pro-Israel think tank in DC. And she's just like the most unapologetic interventionist on almost anything. But she gets christened by Trump as like this paragon of America First. So it just tells you it doesn't mean anything. All it means is basically fidelity to Trump. I mean, the Republican Party actually is kind of a personality cult. I know that sounds like a Rachel Maddow line. Yeah. But the fact is that right now Trump commands more personal sway over the Republican Party than probably any figure in like a modern American history over one political party. Trump puts out one Truth Social post and he determines who wins Republican primary elections in the House and Senate. It's actually incredible. And there's no kind of guiding theme as to who he endorses other than personal loyalty to Trump. So it's a personality cult. There's otherwise you can't discern any other intelligible ideological continuity in terms of his endorsements beyond just personal obsequiousness to him. So it's actually kind of I'm finding it more and more disturbing as somebody who kind of like fended off or was wary of some of the more excessive anti-Trump hysterics like over the years. Now it's like reached a different phase that I find more alarming than I would have like 5 or 6 years ago. Maybe I'm alone and maybe I'm crazy. I don't know, but there's something that is just off about it.
Interesting. I know what you mean though, that thing where you don't want to agree with with people you disrespect, but you know, like what is it? A broken clock is right 2 times a day. I mean,
But you notice that Elise Stefanik in that clip makes a point to say that the aid has to be without conditions.
Yeah, right.
There's no other. I don't think there's a single other government expenditure, domestic or foreign, that Elise Stefanik would say ought to have 0 conditions attached to it. Like imagine her saying that with respect to any kind of domestic spending item. No way. Republicans love to claim that they're safeguarding American tax dollars and whatnot. But here, it's like the biggest like the organizing virtue of the Republican Party is to have 0 conditions at all in just subsidizing the warfare of a technically foreign state. Now, they don't think it's a foreign state. And I can see that the argument for that, but you know, at least in terms of the international system, it technically is a different state. So it's bizarre.
I want to return to the point you made about how Israel is, you know, seen as not a foreign state, and in some ways that makes sense because it really is an arm of the U.S. and U.S. hegemony. What does that mean concretely?
Well, you know, one thing that Stefanik mentions in her speech there, and you see a lot of pro-Israel politicians reference this in reverence, is that, you know, within 12 minutes, Harry Truman recognized the Declaration of Independence of Israel in 1948. And it was only through the accession or through the countenance of the U.S. that Israel became a state, frankly. Now, it's complicated. I'm not saying it's that strictly simple. The Soviet Union was involved, et cetera, France. But particularly by the 1960s, once Israel began to more militarize, right, and then definitely by 1967 when it conquers the Palestine, the West Bank, and adjoining territories, the U.S. becomes basically inextricable to the very sustenance of the Israeli state. So not when it was just like kibbutzim or like left wing, like Noam Chomsky going to live on a kibbutz. Right now, that when it became a modern nation state with all the furnishments, then that was an outgrowth or an extension of U.S. power. I mean, John F. Kennedy, ahead of the 1962 midterm elections, put out a notice to American Jewish groups saying that, you know, vote Democrat in the 1962 midterm elections because I'm getting ready to approve the first mass disbursement of arms to Israel in like a heavily militarized sense. Now, the first 10 or 15 years or so of the existence of Israel, the U.S. was kind of a little bit more detached from it, or had like a bit more a mixed approach. But the point is, you know, at least like if you even want to just demarcate it from 1967, which I think is a good place to demarcate it because that's when it became a bona fide occupying power, right?
Right.
It only does so at the pleasure of the U.S., right? And in terms of I don't have to recite all this to you, but in terms of its place in the international system and the UN and diplomatically, economically, militarily, and every other sense, Israel exists as a function of U.S. power. Now, you can make an argument that it actually diminishes U.S. power in the long run by exposing it to so much Arab and Muslim animus in the middle of the Middle East and this like hotbed of religious extremism. And that might be correct, but the fact remains that it is a function of U.S. power. And that's why when you go to Israel, just flash your U.S. passport around, and it's like you might as well be an Israeli citizen, even if you're not Jewish, like myself. Right. Although they all assume I'm Jewish, which was a benefit for me because of my, I guess, self-deprecating manner.
Right.
And good looks. But yeah, it's just I just think it's inextricable. That's why when people we'll have sometimes people say that, oh, we should just let them fend for themselves, right?
Yeah.
Or we should pull out from the Middle East, or we should not get entangled in these foreign conflicts. Well, you might want that in a vacuum or in principle, but it's just inescapable that there is this inextricable tie between the U.S. and Israel. That's why, when people talk about the Israel lobby or the Jewish
exactly.
lobby,
That's the big debate, right? Whether it's like the dog wagging the tail or the tail
mutual.
wagging the dog.
I think at this point it's mutual.
Yeah.
I don't think there's not either or. But even when people talk about the pro-Israel lobby, there's a lot of focus on AIPAC, and AIPAC obviously is influential.
Yeah.
Because it's the more overtly political element of the pro-Israel lobby. But there's such a huge constellation of groups and individuals that comprise the pro-Israel lobby and have for decades.
And Kufi also on the Christian side.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Christians United for Israel, and this is why I'm talking. I made a point to distinguish the Republican pro-Israel coalition from the Democratic one, because Kufi, Christians United for Israel, that was only founded in 2006 or 7, right. So it hasn't been around for all that long, right? So, in the 90s, you wouldn't have seen Focus on the Family and Parents Research Association and these other Christian right groups that much involved in Israel, right?
Yeah.
But then it became a real organizing force. And actually, John Hagee came to Washington, D.C. and lobbied Mike Johnson, who's also an evangelical Christian, right, to really get to work on passing that national security supplemental bill for almost $100 billion with the Ukraine funding and then also the Israel funding, and it worked. But so I don't know. People I sometimes encounter people who just assume that the influence of the Christian evangelicals has diminished because, I guess maybe society overall has secularized. But I don't think that's true at all for the Republican Party. I think it's actually grown in prominence. I mean, can you imagine a Republican now doing anything like what George W. Bush even did by endorsing a two-state solution? No way.
Right. Yeah.
And in
or
fact,
when Reagan called up and said to Begin, this is a Holocaust, apparently. I mean, that wasn't public, but he got him to stop doing what he was doing in Lebanon.
Yeah, no, you're right. And Trump in particular, because he's not himself a professing Christian. I mean, sometimes he'll claim to be a Christian.
Yeah, I remember they asked him why the IRS was targeting him. He's like, because of my extreme religiousness or something.
Yeah, or
hilarious.
Lauren Boebert said that when he fell asleep in court this week, he was actually praying.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Or last week, I think. But because he's not really a believing Christian, but just panders to them so ostentatiously, or at least he hasn't in this election cycle because he already has them in the bag, so he doesn't have to cater to them anymore.
Yeah.
So that means he has to even be more kind of just blatant in catering to their wishes. Whereas George W. Bush, for example, who was, he claimed to be a born-again Christian, he was an alcoholic when he found God, etc.
Right.
So he had more of a personal attachment, therefore he didn't really have to quite as brazenly pander to them. So it's like a counterintuitive dynamic, right?
Yeah, interesting. So what brought you to Israel, and what was your experience like there? Right. Yeah. All righty. Thank you so much, Michael.
All right. Take care.
You too. Have a great night. Thank you, everyone, so much for tuning in to this wonderful show. If you watched it live, you're in luck. You're going to get to see this whole thing. You got to see the whole thing. If you're watching this later and you want to see the full chat with Michael, where we talk about Ukraine, about pretending to be Jewish on campus, about Israel, where we disagree a little bit, then make sure you become Patreon supporters at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Thank you so much, Brad, for all your help. As always, thank you so much, Tyler. Thank you so much, Phantom Fanta. And I will see you guys next week. And again, that's at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Bye, everyone.
Okay, calm down. You got limits, man. You got limits, man.